Most Star Wars fans, especially those who grew up with the EU, can and will agree that Grand Admiral Thrawn was somewhat disappointing in Ahsoka. At least when you look at the potential of what he could have been and done in the series, especially when basing off of the ingenious and relentless nature of the source material Thrawn. And this poor portrayal of Thrawn did hurt the series, at least for me, whom expected so much more smarter moves from him, rather than constantly making things easier for the good guys in the geist of supposedly being in control of the situation and always being one step ahead. So in this video, I thought it'd be fun to imagine how the Ahsoka series would look like if we instead had the real Thrawn that we know from the books, both in the EU and even the canon, as both were written by Timothy Zahn after all, and what he would do differently compared to Filoni's version of Thrawn. Number 1. For starters, during his time on Peridea, Thrawn would have taken advantage of the Night Sister magic early on to already find and locate Ezra Bridger long before Sabine and Ahsoka had arrived. He'd send a squad or two of stormtroopers backed up with 2 Imperial dropships and kill him in no time, or at the very least capture him as a prisoner. And as we've seen in the series, Ezra is weaponless and living amongst the pacifist crab snail people known as the Noti. The second Ezra realizes that he's outnumbered, he begs to be captured. Not to mention, with him seeing his new Noti friends being put in harm's way too, he would instantly fold. Thrawn would have absolutely no problems here. Number 2. When Baylan initially brings Sabine in as a prisoner, Thrawn would see no use in her. Yes, he'd thank her for making such a foolish decision in dooming her galaxy that resulted in giving Thrawn a way off Peridea, but that's about it. He would kill her for revenge and be done with it, as there would be no benefit for him in keeping her alive or reuniting her with Ezra. Sabine has served their purpose, and that's enough for Thrawn. Number 3. When Ahsoka arrives in the new galaxy, she is faced with the Eye of Sion right from the get-go and takes heavy damage from it. Enough damage that a normal pilot would die right there and then. But with her flying ability, sure, she can survive, but is forced to crash land on Peridea, in a spot that Thrawn is well aware of and already preparing his ties to finish the job. Number 4. Not knowing that Ezra and Sabine are dead, Ahsoka escapes from her crashed T6, leaving a damaged Huyang behind as she grabs a random nearby howler and attempts to look for her friends. Meanwhile, once Thrawn confirms that Ahsoka's ship is downed, he proceeds to send a squadron of TIE fighters to go after Ahsoka, which they find her in no time at all and kill Ahsoka with an aerial strike. As with the Howler naturally being unable to outrun the TIEs and Ahsoka being left out in the open, she would have no chance and be killed right here and now, just like all the other Jedi who died in similar circumstances during Order 66. Number 5. Enoch at this point alerts Thrawn that the cargo transfer is complete and all of his enemies on Peridea are confirmed to be dead. Sabine is killed right from the get-go, Ezra dies while tortured in captivity by the Night Sisters, and Ahsoka later by the airstrike. At this point, Thrawn is able to take his time and freely leave Peridea, returning back to the main galaxy with majority of his forces still intact, with little to almost no casualties. Of course, this all ends in a perfect scenario for Thrawn without making a single mistake. And even if we did go with his mistakes that we did see in the series, he'd still be able to fix those in the final 2 episodes. Like for example, having his Imperial patrol cruisers actually attack Ahsoka, Ezra, and Sabine rather than only serving as a troop transport and nothing else. as the trio would certainly struggle holding off both Shin, the night troopers on the ground, and the 2 patrol cruisers in the air, and if anything, he'd be able to send in a few TIE fighters to really cement in a win. And even if we let this pass, he'd still be able to make up for things in the final episode by having some TIEs shoot down Ahsoka, Ezra, and Sabine when they're riding on those howlers. Or if not that, then lock down or destroy the temple ruins gate, or even the stairs, so that Ahsoka and friends can't get to the top. The list really does go on what better Thrawn could have done in each situation compared to what he ended up doing, or more so not doing, which many times goes against his belief to never underestimate a Jedi, which is what he keeps on doing anyway via his actions despite what's coming out of his mouth. Now, granted, you could argue that had we been given the real Thrawn in Ahsoka, things would have been too easy for him, and not many people would be thrilled to see the likes of Ahsoka and Sabine and Ezra killed off so easily and quickly. But I'd argue that's all due to the simple writing of the show, as after all, every situation that Thrawn is put in, he's given a reasonable and obvious chance each time to outplay his opponents. Yet, Filoni chooses him not to do this in order to give Ahsoka and the heroes a way to survive, even if it doesn't make any sense for him to do so. That said, I'm not saying the trio should all be killed off, or survive, or anything like that, but again, if the writing here were better and it actually put Thrawn in a clear disadvantage, or facing intelligent opponents that force him to use his noggin, rather than the opposite, things would of course be different with that outcome, with less criticism pointed towards the show's portrayal of Thrawn. Or perhaps just maybe rewrite things differently, such as to have Ezra become the leader of the Raiders, and with them fight back against Thrawn's forces, which, sure, while Thrawn would still have an advantage, he would at least have to face some resistance. And who knows, maybe before that, Ezra could seek out the portal to the world between worlds, as for being stranded on Peridia for a decade, I'm sure he'd explore as much as he could, maybe tap into the Force and sense it. As, I mean, if you think about it, Baylan was only there for a few days at most and found it. So realistically, there's no reason for Ezra, with more time and already having entered the world between worlds, to not eventually discover it. And hey, Ezra with access to the world between worlds portal would then seriously cause problems for Thrawn. At least enough for him to actually be wary and overall make a more interesting story than what we ended up getting. Not to mention, you could do similar rewrites to Sabine and Ahsoka's time on Peridia too, thus giving them a more realistic reason to survive. And in doing so, actually making Thrawn work for his victories. Or at least the real Thrawn, of course. So then all of the viewers new to Thrawn could then witness his brilliance in action and be shown it, rather than be told as to why he's such a virtual threat to the galaxy. As, after all, Filoni's Thrawn unfortunately already struggled with going through Ahsoka Season 1 on easy mode. And 7 out.